Good morning. So how many of you have not had breakfast? As someone who has been a typical last bencher throughout his academics, I would request you to not have me for breakfast. So I'll try and keep this as interesting as possible. I was told that there was already a session that started at about 8:15. Believe me, I've never attended a session that starts at 8:15. So hats off to your patience and your energy levels. So the topic that I have chosen for today is a civilizational identity relevant for an ever-globalizing world. Very boring, I understand. It must be downright boring. I'll try and keep this as interactive as possible. So I've been given an hour to interact with you. I will reserve the last 20 to 25 minutes for question and answers. And as someone who's represented women supporting the tradition of Sabarimala, there is a decent chance that a good number of women are perhaps uncomfortable with my position. So preference will be given to girls and ladies with respect to questions as much as possible. Feel free to come after me. Feel free to shoot as many uncomfortable questions as possible. And I'll try my best to defend myself. So I was on the way. I usually don't prepare for my speeches because it's usually the moment that decides what I decide to speak and what I wish to share with the audience. And I was wondering, what is it that I exactly talk to you about? I was told that the age group is largely between 18 and 30. How many are between 18 and 22? That's a fairly large number. How many of you find civilization as a topic remotely interesting? Civilization and identity as a topic remotely interesting. Not many. Okay, that's an uphill job. So, when you think of India, or when you think of its civilization, stand up and give me an answer. What comes to your mind first? Feel free to shoot answers, volunteer with answers. Let's keep this interactive. I am sure that with the age group of 18 to 30, we can have a fairly high amount of energy levels. So what is it that comes to your mind when you think of India? And when you think of Bharat? Diversity, yes? Sorry? Culture, okay? Religion, okay. Next. Bollywood, okay. Corruption, okay. Soldiers, okay. You know what are the two most popular things about India in Europe or in North America? For the most part, it was Taj Mahal, Basmati rice, and Aishwarya Rai. So for some reason, we seem to have managed to establish a connect based on culture. And that tells you a lot about this society. Which is to say that it has managed to make its presence felt on the cultural front when it comes to soft power without necessarily adopting the mode of conquest, without necessarily choosing to go to somebody's place and saying, I will now impose my culture on you. That seems to be the leitmotif and that seems to be the message of India. So for the last few days, I've been reading this beautiful book by Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan called The Philosophy of Hinduism. While it calls itself the philosophy of Hinduism, it is effectively the philosophy of this country across the length and breadth and expanse of this country. Now, when you speak of religion, somebody mentioned religion. Can you just tell me what you make of religion in an Indian sense? What is religion? It's a way of life. Beautiful answer. Anybody else? So let's open up this topic for a bit more of controversial statements. Okay, I'm known for making open, blunt, outspoken comments. So feel free to eat me after my talk for the rest of the 25 minutes that I open up for question and answers. Is the Indian concept of religion the same as the Western understanding of religion? Okay, good. There seems to be some kind of consensus on this. No. Why? What makes the Indian concept of religion different from Western understanding of religion, or let's say an Abrahamic understanding of religion? So one gentleman mentions polytheism. Next. Sorry? Canonization.
Culture.
Culture, okay. Different mindset, okay.
Indian religion is a way of life.
Okay, fair enough. So that statement that the Supreme Court has made in a judgment has become fairly popular. I'm not sure how many people even understand the context of that statement. One person mentioned polytheism. The moment you mention polytheism, there are 2 or 3 consequences that flow from polytheism. One, that you do not believe in imposing one God on everybody else. Yes or no? Okay. Therefore, everybody is entitled to choose for themselves a certain form of the deity. Yes or no? Okay. Therefore, with that flows the concept of diversity in religious beliefs. Yes or no? Okay. Therefore, inherently, you're comfortable with diversity. Yes or no? Okay. I'm fairly sure that most people who are part of this audience don't come from the same part of India. Yes or no? Are you uncomfortable with each other? So does any outsider need to teach you lessons in diversity? That's the answer. Frankly speaking, I've been trying to grapple with this concept called dharma for a very long time. I'm someone who's perhaps a bit religious, largely cultural, and certainly not spiritual. If you ask me to sit through a class of meditation, trust me, the loudest snore would be from me. I'm incapable of meditating. Because it's a restless mind, I prefer something that has a lot more of action. I prefer to watch a puja or a homam or a yajna being performed as opposed to meditating. That's something that's part of my nature. I can't help it. The one thing that I've tried to understand is, what is this concept of dharma? Why is dharma so different from religion? So, I've been trying to read some literature about it. Allow me to put you through this torturous treatment for the next 5 minutes and explain what is the concept of dharma, because that is largely going to explain the concept of civilizational identity. There is an individual and there is the society. Think of the individual as someone who's driving his car, and the society performs the role of having a traffic signal. If free will were to completely dictate the course of the person's choice, can you legitimize the concept of a traffic signal? If free will and independent choice and individual choice were to be absolutely supreme, if you look at the entire concept from that standpoint and from the standpoint of individual, the traffic signal would come across as oppressive, correct? And if the traffic signal were to dictate every twist and turn that you make, and were to decide how you are supposed to move your steering wheel at every moment, that would be an oppressive social control, correct? Yes. But what is it that keeps the traffic moving as much as possible with very few accidents as possible? The balance that you strike between the individual's right to drive in a manner he chooses, in a manner it pleases him, and the society's right to impose a certain boundary condition to ensure that he does not come in the way of others' safety. That would be the definition of balance, right? Individual choice meets societal responsibility. That effectively is the definition of dharma. Which is to say, an individual must have the maximum possible ability to express himself. So if anybody tells you that Indic religions or Indian civilization is largely anti-individual because it imposes social control, they really don't know what they're talking about. Because I can't think of any other architecture, any other civilizational architecture, any other religious architecture, any other faith-based architecture which gives so much of latitude to individuals to do what they wish to do. Are you forced to go to a Sunday school? Are you forced to go to a temple on a regular basis? That is inherently because it believes in giving you a certain amount of latitude and allowing you to decide what is right for you according to your temperament. This flexibility, over a point of time, if it were to be abused, it is entirely a right-based discourse, which is to say, I have the right to do this, I have the right to do that. But if the entire discussion is about rights and there are no duties involved, who takes up the responsibility of ensuring that there is order in the society? This balance between right and duty is effectively what defines dharma. As a consequence, it does not require you to have a belief in a certain deity. It does not require you to adhere to traditions merely because they've been followed for 2,000 years or 5,000 years or 7,000 years. It allows you to decide what is relevant for a given time and circumstance, keeping in mind that there is a fundamental definition of dharma that needs to be adhered to. This is effectively what dictates and distinguishes dharma from other non-dharmic religions, which is why you don't have one central book, which is why you do not have one central organization that decides to dictate the destinies of each and every person of this community. Frankly speaking, we are an agglomeration of multiple schools of thought. There is no one school of thought except for the commonality that we have chosen not to impose one school of thought on others. And that is the only thing that ties you, that is the only thing that makes you common. And this is effectively what distinguishes most religions, or at least all religions that have come out of this particular country from religions that have come from elsewhere. I'm not saying what is right and what is wrong. I'm merely trying to tell you what is it that separates the faith process and the thought process of this country from other countries, which is why it has been possible for you to have diversity, which is why it has been possible for you to exist, notwithstanding the number of languages that India has. How many languages do we have? At the very least, 1,500, that's a very conservative number. Europe struggles to keep itself together with barely 30, 40 languages. And most languages there are at least similar to each other. Notwithstanding the fact that there is a fair amount of faith-based homogeneity, they're largely of the same religion, and still they struggle because they have not cracked the code of what is diversity. And that is the central point that India tries to convey. Think of India as a microcosm of the world, which is to say, and this is something that most thinkers and most philosophers who have taken an active interest in Indian philosophy have said, there is not a single thought, good, bad or ugly, which has ever been thought of or which has ever existed in the world, which has never existed in India. And what does not exist in India does not exist anywhere else. This is not a statement of nationalistic jingoism. This is not a statement of racial pride. This is to simply say that this is a culture that has traveled a journey for about 7,000 years at the very least, not 5,000 years. I don't subscribe to the Aryan invasion theory. So according to me, even if we have existed for 7,000 years, we would have made so many mistakes and we would have drawn so many lessons that there is a decent chance that the human experience is defined by Indian experience, which is why the latest studies when it comes to racial studies or genetic studies are focusing on what is known as out of India theory. As opposed to Aryan invasion theory, they're looking at out of India theory. How many of you have had the opportunity to travel to Europe, or let's say Northwest Europe, the Baltic countries? Which are the Baltic nations? What are the 3 countries which are by the Baltic Sea? Have you heard of Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania? These are former Soviet republics, or part of the Soviet Republic. Go to Lithuania, and you'll be surprised and shocked at the amount of similarity that it shares, Lithuanian language shares with Indian languages. The sheer amount of Sanskrit that will fall in your ears, even if you don't like it, even if you don't want it, is amazing and astounding. So, for the better part of the last 200 years, the course has been, perhaps they came from outside and therefore there is similarity between Indian languages and foreign languages. But the fact is, it's not Euro-Indian languages, it's Indo-European languages, and therefore it must have gone from here to there. So, try and take some interest in some of these studies because it will help you understand what is our identity. But why is our identity so important? Are we saying that Indians are the best in the world, or are we saying that Indian thought is the most supreme in the world, or an Indian faith is the best in the world, and there is no route to heaven that does not go through an Indian religion? Is that the statement that we make? Have you ever heard of an Indian faith make the statement that if you do not approach God through the temple and temple alone as an institution, you will only reach hell? Have you ever heard that statement? Because that is something that is fundamentally incompatible with our thought process. In fact, we even go to the extent of saying that you don't need to believe in God. Can you name an Indian religion that does not believe in God? An atheistic religion and an agnostic religion both exist as part of dharmic faiths. Name the 2 religions. Let's see how much you understand of Indian faiths. Does Buddhism believe in God? The answer is a no. It believes in nirvana, it believes in karmic theory, but it certainly doesn't believe in the existence of one supreme deity. Jainism is undecided, and which is why it falls within the basket of agnosticism. Why is all of this important? How does this help you at your stage of life? How does identity matter to people who are 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and 20-year-olds? How does it make a difference? Why is your name so important? If somebody were to constantly call you from a name that is different from yours, would you respond to that name? Do you or do you not associate name with your identity? Yes or no? Yes. Therefore, it is at least clear that identity matters to you. Your personal identity matters to you. Yes or no? Yes. So if your personal identity matters to you, then the identity of a group of individuals too must matter. Because at the end of the day, they perhaps have something in common. What is your understanding of history? What do you mean when you say history? What is history at the end of the day? When you say India's history, what is India's history? What is the sum and substance of history according to you? Just use it in one word. It is the story of your journey which explains where you are, what you are, and how have you arrived at that particular place, defining who you are at that particular point of time. Therefore, it is the sum and substance of your identity. Yes or no? Your past plus present is effectively your identity. And the way you choose to go forward is future. Correct? That's the definition of identity. The one thing that we must realize over a point of time, and each day the course of politics is telling us, perhaps with greater reinforcement and greater vigor, that if you do not have a clarity with respect to your identity, your state of confusion will be constantly attacked and exploited to fill it with an alien identity which is perhaps incompatible with the belief of this particular land. I'll make a bold statement. Do you or do you not believe that the Indian version of Islam is different from a non-Indian version of Islam? Yes or no? Yes. How is that possible? Or how has that become possible? Because at the end of the day, religion has to interact with the environment. And therefore, religion has to interact with the cultural heritage of that particular place and the language of that particular place. Can you rule out the possibility that there must be at least one Muslim who is from Kerala or from Tamil Nadu who does not understand either Urdu or Arabic? Correct? If that is the case, clearly religion plays a certain role, perhaps about 50 to 60%, but the rest of the role is played by what? Your surrounding, your culture, the language, the people you interact with on a daily basis, at least 12 hours a day. Therefore, when you're looking at identity, when you're looking at civilizational identity, you must realize that religion perhaps plays a role, but beyond that, what plays a role is the culture of that particular place. And on a daily basis, if newspapers are any reflection of the state of discourse on a daily basis, what is the subject of discussion is identity. Either it is gender-based identity, or language-based identity, or region-based identity, or religion-based identity, and the most favorite all, caste-based identity. So if identity is so inseparable from your life on a daily basis, is it possible for you to ignore identity and hope that your utilitarian qualifications, which is to say I'm an engineer, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, and can that be the whole and soul of your identity? If there is a Chinese engineer, there is an American engineer, there's a German engineer, and there's an Indian engineer, and let's take for granted that their qualifications are the same and their skill sets are the same, what separates them from each other? What separates an engineer who comes from different nationalities from each other? It is their national identity, it is their cultural identity. And why is that important? Because ultimately it defines or it conditions the manner in which you think. It dictates, even subconsciously, even without your own knowledge, the manner in which you approach a certain problem. If you've lived in a homogeneous society where there is absolutely no diversity, it is that society which has to give lessons on diversity to its employees. Are there any Indian organizations which are aware of which have diversity courses for its employees, for any multinationals? For a Punjabi who comes to Kerala, is there a diversity course? Or is there a diversity course for a Malayali who goes to the Northeast? This is something that you need to understand. The sum and substance of my attempt, wherever I've gone to speak to youngsters, is to try and instill in them a certain amount of cultural respect, if not cultural pride. Because the word pride could have a negative connotation wherein you could end up thinking that he's asking us to believe that we are superior to others. I'm not even making that statement. All I'm trying to say is that when somebody decides to spit on your heritage, or somebody decides to run down your culture, or somebody decides to mock at what is it that you've received over 7,000 years, stand up for it whenever you get an opportunity, but you will never be in a position to stand up for it unless and until you yourself are clear about where you come from. Unless and until you're clear about what is it that you stand for. How many of you are from Kerala? Good. So I'll throw a few googlies at you. Let's see how well you respond to them. What is the difference between the deity called Ayyappa and Dharmasastha? What is the distinction? He is effectively a deity of Keralite origins, so to speak. What is the distinction between Dharmasastha and Ayyappa? Yes, please. Yes. Please pass on the mic to the gentleman, please. Introduce yourself and give your answer.
I'm Adul. I'm from Pandalam. Okay, in Sabrimala, he's in the form of Naishtik Brahmachari.
Good.
And in Shasta, he's in the form of a child, Bala Shasta.
Right.
That's the difference.
So he's got the answer 70% right, and a huge round of applause for him. So let's build the argument from there for a moment. So he understands fundamentally that there is a distinction between Dharmasastha and Ayyappa. These are two forms of the same deity, correct? Therefore, temples which are dedicated to Dharmasastha, do you find any restriction on the entry of women? Yes or no? Okay. What about the restriction with respect to the deity at Sabrimala? He's just made a point that he is a Naishtika Brahmachari or a Brahmachari. Right? So here's an instance where there are two forms. Both of these forms fundamentally are different because one is a Brahmachari, the other is not. If there is a deity who is a Brahmachari and there is a deity who is not a Brahmachari, or there is one form which is Brahmachari and the other form which is not a Brahmachari, does common sense tell you that there must be a consequence on the tradition of the temple because of the difference in the forms of the deity? Yes or no? You don't need to know the exact practice, but you can surely understand the logic that the form of the deity effectively dictates the practices of that particular temple. Yes or no? Is Ganesha a married person or a bachelor? How many believe that he is married? Okay, how many believe that he is a bachelor? In Maharashtra, he is not a bachelor. In the north, he is not a bachelor. In the south, he is a bachelor. Riddhi and Siddhi are supposed to be his consorts, his divine wives. Is Hanuman a bachelor or not? What if I were to show that he is not a bachelor? That he is certainly not an Naishtika Brahmachari. There are examples to the contrary. Is Ravana worshipped or not? Okay, where is he worshipped? Not just in Sri Lanka. There are states in India where there are temples which are dedicated to Ravana. Why does this become important is, if you fail to understand the diversity in your own traditions, it gives an opportunity for others who do not understand that particular tradition to make fun of that particular tradition and throw words such as discrimination. Take it from me in writing. In any audience where there is at least 50% of people from the South, I will never call them South Indians, they're Indians from the South. I have seen a very clear understanding of the practice or the tradition. And those, even from the South, if they don't understand the tradition, are the ones who immediately jump on the bandwagon of gender discrimination. Now, I will not get into let's say logic, I will not get into Shastra, I will not get into anything. So I will simply throw a couple of numbers at you. Assume for a moment that there are 500 temples dedicated to Dharmasastha and Ayyappa across the country, and there is only one temple which observes this particular restriction. Is that an example of discrimination or is that an example of diversity? Answer loudly. Diversity. You have to ask yourself, when the facts are so clear, why is it that this issue has been distorted to this extent? That this beautiful place, that this sacred temple has become the center of such an ugly controversy. It is not disconnected from the topic or the theme of my topic because it is ultimately a question of identity. I see the movement supporting the tradition of the Sabarimala temple as a movement of assertion of the indigenous identity, which is basically saying, stop looking at us from the lens of an outsider, stop looking at us from the lens of a Britisher, stop looking at us from a colonial lens. You don't understand us, therefore you do not reserve the right to judge us, is the basic point of this entire movement. Can you decide or pass a comment on something unless and until you understand it? Can you make a comment on physics or mathematics or even classical music or Carnatic music or dance form on its technicalities unless and until you're a student of that particular subject? Is it possible? Yes or no? Will you ever make the mistake of speaking on a subject that you're not aware of? Then how is it that so many of us have such fantastic opinions on this particular issue without knowing what the tradition is about? That is the fundamental question that you must ask yourselves. It is possible that most of us believe that this generation is vastly superior in its intellectual capacity to its ancestors. It is possible for us to believe that we know better than our fathers, our forefathers, our ancestors. And it is possible that we believe that we worship logic and reason much more than everybody else did because they were superstitious idiots. Assume for a moment that is the case. Then of all the people, the burden is on you to ensure that you never open your mouth on a subject unless and until you are informed of the facts. Yes or no? So the next time, even if you are not aware of the tradition or you are not aware of the facts, but somebody chooses to shoot from the hip or comment and he is not in a position to back it up, do you have at least a semblance of duty to ask him what is the basis of his opinion or her opinion? I would say so. If we are comfortable making fun of our own traditions because we believe it's superstition, then the question is, do we have a problem with the tradition or do we have a problem with the question of superstition? If we have a problem with superstition, regardless of where it comes from, you must be in a position to question it. Yes or no? And regardless of the number of people who hold that particular opinion, because if you decide to raise questions only if the number of people on the opposite side is less, then that will make you a coward. Yes or no? If there are more people opposing you and you do not have the guts to raise the question, then clearly it's a position of convenience. Yes or no? So when the media constantly talks about this particular issue, honestly touch your hearts and tell me how many of you decided to voice your opinion on social media, asking what is the basis of the media's opinion. How many of you decided to use your platforms, your Twitter handles, your Facebook platforms or WhatsApp groups, or all the favorite platforms for, they say, this particular generation, to ask them these fundamental, simple questions? Why? Because the issue does not affect you. It doesn't concern you. Had this been a campaign with respect to a non-dharmic institution or a non-Hindu institution, would some of us have not felt that this is unfair treatment to a minority religious institution? We would have. Yes or no? It's not wrong. If you see injustice happening to any institution, regardless of its faith, you have a right to question it. There's no doubting it at all. Whether it's minority or majority really doesn't make a difference. But you would have raised your voice, yes or no? But when it comes to your own institutions, there is a fundamental reluctance to stand up for it. Why? Is it because you're ashamed of your identity? Is it because you're ashamed of your history, your traditions? But how can you be ashamed of something if you don't understand it? Then neither should you be proud of it, nor should you should be ashamed of it. But why is your default setting that of being embarrassed? If you do not understand something, then the point is you must be undecided about it, correct? Then neither should you be pro or con, for or against. But the default setting seems to be always against in most places when it comes to our own traditions. That goes to the question of identity. The root of this particular issue is identity. The reason why I keep using this word like a stuck gramophone for the last half an hour is that as days go by and as time passes, you will realize that this particular word, this particular concept, this particular construct is going to be at the center of every national discourse. And there is not going to be a single issue that is going to affect your life which is devoid of its relationship to identity. If you have a position on reservation, assume for a moment that you have a position on reservation, can you divorce the question of reservation from that of a caste identity? You cannot. I am someone who supports reservations, by the way, for a very good reason. My reasons are different, but I do support them. The question is for how long will they last and who all must get it, but I certainly support caste-based reservations for a specific reason. But that's a discussion for another day. But the point I'm trying to make is this. When youngsters of your age, I'm 33, I don't know if there is any member of the audience who is a participant who is of my age. So I'll think of myself as someone who's at least a generation away from you, at the very least. When youngsters of your age choose to not take an interest in issues with respect to identity, it allows somebody to use you and make useful idiots out of you because you have a certain sense of activism, which is not necessarily supported by facts always, and that plays into the hands of people with a vested interest. You do not need to support anyone. But since you're such worshippers of logic and reason, and there has not been a single generation on earth which is as intelligent as you, and as smart as you, and as informed as you, I would certainly expect you to question every superstition and every position. And when you're presented with facts which you're not aware of, you must be in a position to change your position. Because if you don't do so, that would be the textbook definition of bias or prejudice. Yes or no? So here's my homework for you. Anyone who already thinks that he's aware of the Sabarimala issue, please go back and read it a bit more. And those who do not have possession of the facts of the issue, but certainly have fantastic opinions on the particular issue, the burden is on you to read further. Take that as a test case and ask yourself, is this an isolated instance or is this a pattern that is emerging? The exhortation that I am trying to make is this. I'm an engineer turned litigator. There is a reason I made that switch. Because I asked myself, what is it that I was going to do after engineering? I was a bloody good engineer, that much I'm sure of. I knew my subject. But the reason I made that switch was only this. Increasingly in my generation, there was a serious distance that was growing from our cultural central point or a cultural fulcrum, the center of gravity of our culture. And largely because there were not enough people who could articulate our position in a manner that is compatible with today's idiom. And therefore I decided to take it upon myself to try and attempt and make that particular change. There's a decent chance that I might fail. Or perhaps there's a 100% chance that I might fail, but nevertheless I've decided to take that particular opportunity. And I've said I'm taking that plunge. I come from a low middle class family, so it's not as if I had resources put on my table on a silver plate or a platinum plate telling me, "Bacche jo karna hai kar." That's not going to happen. I made that switch because I'm serious about it. What surprises me is those who see a value in justice freedom, social justice, equality, don't see a value in history and identity. That is almost mind-boggling. How are you going to understand the concept of justice and freedom and free speech or any of these values that you wish to speak about or you're so passionate about unless and until you understand the journey? You don't need to form an opinion and then try and support the opinion with facts, but at least start having the facts and then arrive at a certain opinion. That is my humble request to this audience. Because if you have a certain opinion and you try and force fit all facts to conform to that opinion, it is dishonesty. Because you're not open to a different conclusion. But at the very least, have facts in your possession. Take an active interest. Can you change the fact regardless of which part of the world you go to that you're an Indian? Can you abandon that identity that you're of an Indian origin? Yes or no? So if somebody has a problem with that identity, even if you have chosen to abandon that identity, he will not stop or she will not stop. Why? Even when it comes to negative issues, we should have women first, is it not? So she will not stop unless and until you've been deprived of that identity. So if somebody has a problem with your identity, at the very least, they've identified that it is an important aspect of your personality. So if you can't realize what is your worth, your enemy is telling you what is your worth. Or your adversary is telling you what is your worth. So as a lawyer, sometimes what happens is, when there are two arguments or two parties, sometimes you don't know which is the argument which he is going to start with. Because you're not able to decide which argument is important. What we do then is that we wait for the first argument that is going to be made for the other side, from the other side. Because that tells us what, according to him, is our weakness or our strong point which he wants to dilute. Because that tells you what is the game plan. My request to you would be only this. Become engineers, become doctors, become lawyers, do whatever you want. But do not ignore anything that affects who you are as a person, not as a professional. And according to me, and I'm backed by several philosophers and thinkers of this country, dharma and religion is the backbone of Indian identity. All culture has come and has flown from this particular Gangotri, and the Ganga which you see before you, which is culture, is the product of that Gangotri. I am not asking you to blindly follow anything. I am simply asking you to try and understand the concept of dharma wherever possible. Let's see if I'm still audible. Okay, I still am. So, I'll raise one contentious issue and then immediately open the floor for questions. Feel free to ask me as many uncomfortable questions as you think you're capable of. And I'm throwing that open challenge at you. And I'll try to answer it to the best of my abilities. I may not succeed, but I'll certainly make an attempt. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know. What is your understanding of the caste system? Can anybody try and explain that? I'm trying to open multiple boxes here, each of them uncomfortable, to see what is the audience's reaction and to see what is your intuitive response to some of these issues. Feel free to stand up and let the audience know what you think of the caste system. There's a gentleman right at the back.
Excuse me. Good morning, sir.
Who's the person asking the question? Yes, please. Yes.
So, sir, you had been asking what is your understanding of the caste system.
Yes.
Actually, in the olden times, caste was not based on birth. It was based on what you did.
Right.
And it has been proved in several cases. In the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira said that caste was based on whatever you did, how one's behavior was. But then as times changed, caste became based on birth. And even now it's being followed, even though the government has tried to reduce it.
Can I just interrupt you for a moment? You
Sure.
can continue, but I have a follow-up question just for a moment. There's a decent chance that perhaps I was unclear in the way I asked it. I am not asking you what is the caste system based on, My question is, what is the caste system? There is a distinction between these two questions. So the question was, what is the caste system? Not what is the benchmark or the basis of the caste system. What is the caste system? What is its purpose? What purpose does it serve? Is it to keep people down, or is it to pull people up? What is the purpose?
Well, one purpose of the caste system is so that people know the differences between each other. And then in some ways it could be that to pull people up so that they know what they are supposed to do.
Thanks.
But then based on the way it is now, sometimes it can be seen that it's more like to push people who are from a lower caste down. Sometimes it kind of tends to get like that.
Okay. How many of you agree with what he said? How many of you agree with what he said? Okay. So for the past few weeks, I've been trying my best to put my limited brain and my limited skills through serious torture in trying to understand what is this Varnashrama system, what is the caste system, how does it connect to the concept of dharma. Assume that you're running a factory.
Excuse me, sir.
Or assume that, I'll come to you. Or assume that you're a machine. Assume for a moment that you're this inanimate object called machine. Is it possible for the machine as a whole, or one component, to take the position that it is superior to the other? Because if the others were missing, could the machine work? Answer the question. Is it possible for anybody to take the position that in a given organization, it can dispense with a certain category of people altogether and still function as an organization? Yes or no? So, as a lawyer, as someone who argues in court, I'll tell you what is my ecosystem comprised of. I have my juniors who assist me. I have my court clerk who effectively takes care of my dates, who ensures that my files are in order. And I also have an office boy who tries to help me whenever there is a client who comes to visit me. Which of these people is dispensable in my life? I need somebody who attends to the clients who come in. I need somebody to manage my cases to some extent. And I need someone who is my ambassador in court. Isn't there a remote possibility that my court clerk is more important than my juniors? Isn't there a possibility that without my court clerk I cannot function, but without my juniors I may function? Isn't that possible? The point that I'm trying to make is this. When you choose to, or when you fail to ask the right questions with respect to your systems, you give an opportunity to someone with a vested interest or with a motivation to define your nature for you, to tell you who you are. Will you allow any other person to dictate your individual identity or your personality and define who you are as a person? Yes or no? You won't. Then how is it that we are so comfortable when it comes to our collective identity? So from my little understanding or my limited understanding of the caste dharma, it's been basically this. It largely applies only to the phase of life where you're a householder. Not when you're a student and not when you've crossed the stage of a householder. But why that particular stage is the focal point of the caste dharma? Because those are your productive years. Those are the years that you make yourself useful to the family as well as to the society because you're still active. And that is when you're at the prime of your vocational expertise or professional proficiency. Therefore, this was primarily meant to be a system which was meant to ensure that you are in a position to contribute your best to the best of your abilities and to the best of your innate nature. Unfortunately, over a point of time, as is human nature, it's like an unreserved compartment in a train. Anyone who gets the seat will never wish that the other person gets the seat, because you've effectively put your position there, you've put your foot in the door. So as a consequence of which, what has happened is that anyone who's occupied what he thinks is the supreme position doesn't want to vacate that particular position. But the good part, and according to me this is the benchmark for every system, Any system that is not open to change and is incapable of change is a system that is meant to die and wither away, regardless of who is its author and where it comes from. Can you really say, having seen whatever it is that you have seen, that as a community and as a let's say as a civilization, you're incapable of reform? Can you really say that you come from a society which is so rigid that when it is pointed its mistakes, it is incapable of accepting its mistakes? When you're told that this is not the way to treat a woman, do you not change the manner in which you treat a woman? There was a time when the daughter would never be considered worthy of her father's inheritance. But today she is as equal as the son, or the son is as equal as the daughter. Yes or no? Do you need any further proof of the fact that you are a fundamentally open system which is open to reform, provided there is a need for reform? This is effectively what you need to take away from this particular session. Whenever there is a discussion on religion, on history, on society, on rights, on discrimination, do not start with an opinion, start with facts. That is the fundamental distinction between an activist and a researcher, because an activist effectively decides the position and holds on to the position regardless of the facts which are presented to that particular person, he or she or she or he, in whichever order you choose to see it. A researcher, a seeker, which is what your civilization is all about, asks the right questions to get the right answer. If you were to ask the question, can I smoke when I pray? Isn't it distinct from asking the question, can I pray when I smoke? There is a distinction between the two questions. And it points towards intent. So my humble request to you would be, enjoy this phase, but also make the maximum utilization of this phase, because you'll never get this time in terms of equipping yourself with maximum abilities or giving yourself maximum tools. The one thing that I regret even till date is that sadly I'm incapable of expressing myself in any language other than English in a decent manner. And that is not a badge of honor at all. That is not a badge of honor at all. A person who cannot even express himself on a public platform in his mother tongue has insulted his origins and his mother tongue, according to me. So if I were to give you 2 or 3 takeaways, 1, be proficient in a language, in an Indian language other than English. Please try and do that. And one of which must be your mother tongue. And pick up another Indian language other than your mother tongue. The reason that you must pick up another Indian language other than mother tongue is because it helps you see the similarity in the culture of this country regardless of where you come from. It's important. Second, whenever there is an issue, feel free to disagree with me or people like me who you see are part of some larger saffron conspiracy, to disagree with us on everything that you think we are wrong. But disagree with us using what you think you are best at than your ancestors, which is facts and logic, not opinions. Start with facts and logic. 3, I am not going to ask you to be religious or spiritual, but at the very least, be proud of your culture. I'm sure that's possible. These are the only 3 takeaways that I have to offer. And just one final thing. If you have a problem with Indian identity and you think it stands for corruption, inefficiency, and incompetence, and the same tendency continues or the same perception continues after 5 years or 10 years, then the blame lies at the doors of your generation, not the previous generation. Yes or no? So whichever profession that you decide to take up, at the very least, try to be among the best in the world for that. So recently I had an opportunity to give a lecture at NIT Bhopal. And that was immediately after my trip to Israel. What is the size of Israel when compared to India? Any idea? Pardon me, I've taken some time from the Q&A session, but just indulge me a bit. What do you think is the relative size of India and Israel? India is 150 times the size of Israel. Greater Mumbai is perhaps bigger than Israel. 80 kilometers, 280 kilometers, or 200 kilometers. That's it, that's the area. The population of Bangalore is close to the population of Israel. 8.5 million is the population of Israel, and 8.3 million is the population of Israel. Oh, sorry, the other way around. Israel is 8.5 million, Bangalore is 8.3 million. And that country, which is located bang in the middle of a desert, is giving us agriculture technology. Kudos to them and shame on us. Aren't these issues that you can change, or aren't these aspects that you can change? Assume that you come from an engineering college and each batch has, let's say, about roughly 600, 700 students spread across 7 to 8 engineering streams. Is it really difficult to produce 5 startups from one batch? Technical startups, technological startups. Is it really that difficult? If it is doable and if it is achievable, and still it doesn't happen, really do you have the right to question your ancestors when the present is in your hands? Your ancestors have built temples we can't imagine today. It's impossible to conceive of such temples of such grandeur, of such scale, of such intricate design, and of such scientific temper. So we really are not in a position to sit and comment on our ancestors unless and until we are in a position to prove that we are different in action and conduct from them. In a good way, of course. Questions, please.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Sir, good morning, sir. Sir, myself Prateek Agarwal from Team 26. My answer to your first question, what is basically caste system or what on basis? I think it is like an organization in which different persons are assigned different jobs so that there can be a harmonious way in which work can be done. And this is same like a lawyer who has achieved a degree of lawyer, practiced lawyer. He can't be a doctor unless and until he chooses to do medical. The same way is the caste system, the earlier. And I have a question for you also. You said you have a view and the people have different view. And the Supreme Court is going to have a trial on Sabrimala temple. I'm not interested in the verdict. I'm just interested in, do you believe that you will get a fair trial, that your issues will be heard by them, or the people will support you? In a democracy, the most important thing is that everyone should get a fair trial. That's it.
Fantastic question. So here are my answers. One,
Thank you, sir.
as someone who respects his profession and also the forum that he practices before, I'm putting my faith in that institution to be fair to our point of view and not be driven by the media narrative. I'm putting that faith. I'm hoping that my optimism will be justified. By that, I don't mean that the court must necessarily rule in our favor. I'm simply saying that the court must at least attempt to understand our position before having formed its opinions, because then there is practically no distinction between them and the anchors of NDTV. But most importantly, the one thing that I draw huge inspiration from is that the biggest source of support in this entire movement have been the beautiful women of Kerala. What a scintillating response to the judgment, and what a democratic response to the judgment, what a peaceful response to the judgment, and what a moving, powerful response to the judgment. That is the manner in which civil disobedience must take place regardless of which cause you're representing. You can never accuse any of them of violence. And you can never accuse them of having transgressed the limits of civility and decency. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm inspired by one or two facts. One, that the devotees of the temple at least know for a fact that there are enough voices in court which represent their point of view in court. And therefore, they will not go unheard, and they will certainly not go unvoiced. The second thing that I draw serious inspiration from is that of all the people, the one person on the bench who was convinced by our position was the lady on the bench. Out of the 5 people on the constitution bench, it was the lady who ultimately accepted and endorsed our position that the petition deserves to be dismissed. that someone who does not even make the statement that he or she believes in Ayyappa has no right of access to that particular temple, because that is not a public place, that is not a picnic spot, that is not a cinema theater, it is a temple. Therefore, if you do not believe in a place of worship or what the place of worship stands for, and you do not believe in the fundamental tradition of the place, I repeat, and I am absolutely open to being quoted on record, you do not have the right, you do not have the God-given right to enter that place.
Good morning, sir.
He's been waiting for a while, let him finish his question, and then the next person can ask. Yes.
Thank you. Deepak ji, actually, it is not a question, it is the construct of a doubt, a comment, and an assurance from my generation. First, I would like to make a comment. When the I'm not talking about the judgment which is a verdict issued by the apex court of this country, but the consequences happened in this land of God, the land, God's own country.
I just put up my Facebook status, it's Ayyappa's own country.
Absolutely.
So proceed.
Absolutely. The arrests happened. The 1,200 people has been arrested and harassed. And in the democracy, expressing the protest is the prerogative which is given, prerogative of every citizen of this country, given by the very Indian constitution, has been used as a tool to suppress the same population. Unfortunately, this is the comment that I would like to make. And the doubt, is it not the intended intrude between colonial powers to create a caste system? Or is it, is the caste system existing before the colonial powers enter into the Indian society? That is the doubt. And the assurance that I would like to give from my generation is, we are already on the battlefield, the ideological battlefield, on the virtual platform, which we are fighting, better than many the so-called leaders or the what we can say, the representatives of the Hindu society or the Indian society. For example, on October 2nd, I have started...
Just to ensure that others, especially I have not had a single lady ask a question or a girl ask a question so far. So in the interest of time, let me respond to your doubt, and perhaps we can continue this offline. Is that okay with you? Can I respond to your question first?
Sure, definitely.
Yes, please. Yes. So the first point that I wish to make is, I'm happy that you have expressed yourself on social media. But if you think that is the be-all and end-all of your ability to express, then you underestimate yourself, and I would say that you're hitting below your weight. 2, there has been such a mass movement around the Jallikattu protests when a lot of youngsters decided to make their presence felt. A similar movement must start among the youth of Kerala. You won't believe it. Every time in every discussion, this blessed state, this beautiful state, has been blamed for voting the wrong people to power. But the one thing that they've proved is, regardless of who is in power and regardless of what the numbers may be, they will never let go of their dharma. According to me, that's the most powerful statement that could have come from this community, and I'm grateful for the adverse judgment because it has woken up the community like this. So I'm someone who's a die-hard optimist. I see a silver lining in the darkest of clouds. And as far as I'm concerned, the silver lining as far as this judgment is concerned is that it has woken up a society that was in deep slumber. And it has woken up the society in such a powerful manner that, I'm sorry to say, if there are people in the world who never were aware of this deity called Ayyappa, that deity has gone global. So as far as I'm concerned, you've helped us get more converts. Thank you. Now, to respond to your point, there's a decent chance that the caste angle or the caste discourse is an invention of the colonial powers. Okay, no problem. But how long are you going to keep blaming them? What sense does it make? You've been an independent country for 70 years. In 70 years, after being bombed out of nowhere, Japan has managed to reach a certain place. Israel has managed to reach a certain place. They've managed to reinvent their identity. They've managed to project their identity. Why are you constantly crying about those people when you've had the opportunity to build your destiny for the last 70 years? Let me finish my point. I will always blame the thief for his intent, his mischievous intent. But I will blame your stupidity for keeping your doors open. And I will blame your apathy for keeping your eyes closed when the thievery is happening and when your stuff is being stolen and you have not had the street smarts to protect yourself. We'll continue this discussion offline. The point I'm trying to make is simply this. Get your history right to the extent of understanding who played what kind of a role in creating a certain mischief or in inventing a certain mischief. But the solution must come from you. And if you lack the interest, inclination, and the originality to come out with a solution, then you have nobody else to blame but yourself. So as far as I am concerned, history must tell you who is responsible for what. But history cannot become your excuse for inaction. I'm sorry. Yes, the lady, she wants, yes.
Namah Good morning, sir.
It's 10:30. Amitji, can I take just 10 minutes more? Is that okay? It's 10:30. Can I take 10 minutes more? Yes, please. Yes.
I would like to know your reasons for which you support the caste system based on you support the reservations based on caste system and not on the based of economic inequality.
Great. So, most individuals, when they have an opinion, it is shaped by their personal experience. There's a decent chance that my position is biased by my personal experience. Allow me to use a few politically incorrect terms. Going by today's definition, I'm a Brahmin, but I don't think I'm a Brahmin in conduct or in mentality. I see more of Rajasic tendencies in me, and therefore perhaps I should have been in a different caste, so to speak, or a different category, so to speak. Despite coming from that background, I come from a low middle class family. So I was always educated in state board schools, in Andhra state board schools. The one thing that is common to most students who are products of Andhra Pradesh state board schools is that whenever they are pitted against students who come from the CBSE medium of education, they always have a sense of inferiority. I've noticed that. Maybe over a point of time, it evens itself out. But at some stage, that exists. Okay? So the question that I asked myself was, I come from a certain background which prides in its educational history or in the fact that it has a temper for education or a passion for education. And if someone who comes from that background suffers from a certain amount of complex only because he's been educated in a state board education or in a state board school, imagine the mental strength or the mental state of mind of someone who's come from a family that has witnessed or that has been subjected to oppression for thousands of years, or at least, at the very least, 500 years. And when he's suddenly pitted against the rest of the community, and he's now told, now the competition is open to you. I'm sorry, it's not a level playing field because mentally you're different. There is a certain sense of confidence that comes from being part of a certain community or a certain background which has always been comfortable with education. And then you're telling them, now the field is open to you and let's have an open playing field or a level playing field. It is going to take a certain point of time until they come at the same level as you in terms of confidence, not in terms of aptitude. There's a difference. There must be someone who's absolutely good at mathematics, but if he doesn't believe that he's good at mathematics, even his brain will refuse to function. That is the difference between aptitude, interest, and confidence. So reservation, according to me, was meant to be affirmative action to give them the same level of confidence. So I do believe, and frankly speaking, if you were to go to several pockets of this country, and if you go outside the urban islands, there is a certain amount of discrimination that is still going on. And if you refuse to accept that fact, it is to your detriment, because your refusal to accept that fact is helping somebody else exploit him to take him out of the dharmic fold. So it's in your interest to accept that fact and do something about it. That's point number one. Point number two is The question would be for how long? We keep citing Ambedkar, saying he said it's only for so many years or for so many generations, and even he didn't think of it as a permanent solution. He didn't think of it as a permanent solution when the community has arrived at a point where its caste identity does not matter anymore. When intercaste marriages become the norm. When it is perfectly possible for you to think of a marriage outside of your caste without being constricted or constrained by other considerations. Will they have the same eating habits? These kind of stupid questions go on in everybody's head. So when that is the case, I do believe that there must be a certain amount of continuity as far as caste-based reservations are concerned, notwithstanding the fact that my own people may not agree with me or people from my community may not agree with me, but take it from me in writing. Anybody who's come from my kind of background would certainly understand what is that I'm trying to say. But, I would certainly ask myself a question. 3 generations, 4 generations, you've arrived at a certain post. There are people who are now in the topmost bureaucratic posts of this country. Just as people responded to Prime Minister Modi's call for giving up LPG subsidies, would there be a similar response if he were to ask them to give up reservations? As opposed to the state imposing that kind of a requirement, asking them to give up their reservations, it's better if it comes from the community itself, because that's a powerful statement. But the more practical consideration being, no political party will have the guts to ask for reservations on caste basis to be banned. So you might as well ensure that the response is more societal, because that will be even more powerful. Because that is a sign that we are all integrated. And that is a sign that the caste card can never be used by anybody from within the community or outside the community to drive a wedge between you. So that's the answer to your question. Next.
Good afternoon, sir. Good morning, sir.
I'll take just 2 more questions and that'll be the end of it. It's 10:35. By 10:40, we'll close it. Yes, lady, please.
Good morning, sir. So my
Yes.
question is, as the law says that everyone is equal in the eyes of law, but even after that, we are able to see that there is a lot of discrimination. So the basic point of my question is that discrimination is because of caste system, because of our mentality, or because of the judgmentals we have made for one another? Accordingly, like, what can be the exact solution to get rid of that discrimination so that we can go ahead for a future where there will be unity?
If I had a solution, I would have spelled it out by now. Unfortunately, I don't.
It's
So,
okay. Thank you, sir.
I can't claim to be the fount of all wisdom, nor can I say that I have answers to every question. That is perhaps the prerogative of a few who believe that they have answers to everything and they know everything under the sun, including what is good for women and what is bad for women. I don't claim to myself that kind of a right. The point I would like to make is simply this. By training and by nature, I struggle to make general statements. So if you say discrimination exists, I don't know in which sphere, in what fact or what form of industry, what is it that we are specifically talking about, because it's important to give a context. But be that as it may, let me take your general statement for a given, and let's assume that that is the proposition. The one thing that I've realized is the biggest fraud that has been committed on the society by several ideologies is to promise equality and to promise elimination of poverty. Because according to me, neither of them is possible.
Yeah, like,
I'll finish my point. The good thing about discourse is you need to let others finish the point. Let me finish my point. And if you still disagree, we'll continue to agree to disagree. The point is, you can never achieve equality. Not in this society, in no society. Nor will you ever be able to eliminate poverty, not just in this society, but any society. What we can certainly do is change the quality of poverty. By that I don't mean intelligently altering the definition of poverty, but simply by saying, if previously you were struggling to have food and that was the definition of poverty, now you're struggling to have Wi-Fi connection, that must be the definition of poverty. Okay? In economics, the answer to that, and I know just a bit of economics, and from what I understand, it's called the rising tide, which is to basically say that the overall standard of living and the quality of living is increased to such an extent that what was previously considered a luxury now becomes a necessity. And your lack of access to that necessity defines your poverty. maybe that is a better way of achieving that. Because the only society which is managed, or the only ideology that has promised complete elimination of poverty and absolute achievement of equality and has failed miserably and astoundingly is communism. So I think there has been no better example than that. As far as I am concerned, it's a fantastic goal to have, to try and reach that particular goal. But if you're going to impose artificial restrictions and artificial constraints to make everybody equal, there are two ways of doing it. Rise everybody up or pull everybody down. Do what you wish to do. That's the point. So I don't think it is fair to assume that equality or inequality is peculiar to the Indian mindset, because that is an insult. If you had made this statement about any other community or any other nationality, wouldn't somebody accuse you of racism? So how is it acceptable when you speak of our own traditions? So try and understand that point. As far as I'm concerned, you go to America, they will certainly say racism exists. You go to the best and the most advanced of countries who you look up to for free speech and free expression, even they have a problem. The question is the degree to which the problem exists and the level at which it exists. Glass ceilings exist all over the world. The question is where they exist and what defines the glass ceiling. When does it begin to exist? That's the question. So I think it's important for us to understand that there are things that you can deal with and there are things that you can't change. But it is always good to try and increase the quality, overall quality of living. That must be the goal according to me. One more question, please, and that'll be the end of it.
Good morning, sir.
I'm inclined to take a question from a lady. Yes, please.
My question to you is that today Sanskrit is losing its essence and students are not much interested in studying Sanskrit because they find it boring. So what will be the after effects of this?
See, the point is, this question is not about finding Sanskrit boring. This question is about a few mental barriers before that. One is that it is associated with a certain caste. Unfortunately, that's what people assume. I don't know why. Second is that the moment you speak of Sanskrit and you wish to make it more public or you wish to make it more accessible to people, unfortunately, it is given the term saffronization. I don't know why. If in India you can't speak of making Sanskrit more widely accessible and more widely readable and more people speaking that language, in which country can you do that? In Germany? Which country will you do that? So that's a question that people have to start asking. Second, I don't believe Sanskrit is a dead language, because Sanskrit manages to make its presence felt through Malayalam, through Telugu, through Kannada, through Hindi. So as far as I'm concerned, you can try your best or your worst and you will never be able to kill this language. It is impossible. It's not going to happen. It will manage to keep itself alive in one way or the other, because that is the natural evolution of languages and that is the organic evolution of languages. You will be going against science if you try to kill a language. Okay, it will find multiple ways of coming about. But the most important thing, which I think your question intends but does not necessarily capture, is this. Why is Sanskrit not popular? That's the question. Sanskrit will be... Yes.
I'm a teacher, I'm teaching also. So what I have observed in the students, like, they are literally not interested in Sanskrit because that's what they tell, that they find it very boring and they're not interested in. So that's why I asked you this question.
I understand, and I'm so grateful to you that you have taken upon yourself this blessed duty of teaching Sanskrit to people.
I'm sorry, I don't teach Sanskrit. I teach physics in 11th and 12th. But the students, they share their views for other subjects also.
I have always believed one or two things. Pop culture is a fantastic medium. And unfortunately, when you look at Bollywood, it has been accepted for God knows what reason that you cannot compose a love tune without the use of Urdu. So when that has become the accepted position, where even Hindi is not acceptable and that there must be a heavy proportion of Urdu, I have nothing against Urdu as a language. I'm simply saying that tomorrow if Punjabi becomes the dominant language for songs in Bollywood, even then there is a problem. That means Avidhi is out, Magadhi is out, Bhojpuri is out, Khadi Boli is out, Hindi is out, then what remains? So as far as I'm concerned, monopoly of any particular language over the popular medium is a problem. Perhaps we need to revisit the ways in which we decide to project and package that particular language. But you should not think of it as a hot plate of food. It would be stupid on our part to directly put our fingers at the center of the plate when you know for a fact that this is a hot potato. So you need to start addressing it through the fringes, which means if it were left to me, I would start with Vedic mathematics first. Because we're Indians, we always look for incentives. What is it in me? Or what is it in it for me? How do I gain out of this particular initiative or exercise? Start by making Sanskrit and allied subjects worth pursuing for the purposes of livelihood in one way or the other. And that starts with Indianization of school curricula, which still follows the Western curriculum according to me. So if you were to address that particular issue, then perhaps you will at least create a situation where people are open to learning Sanskrit on their own without you having to push it. It's always better to have a pull than a push. So I think I'll end my pravachan for today. Thank you. And you've been an extremely patient audience. I'm sorry if I was complex, my apologies, but a fantastic audience. Thank you for a patient hearing. Thank you.